All right, thank you. I'm like super encouraged by Brenna's talk today. That's why there's a big smile too, just because to hear positive impact. I'm Jason Yip. My co-authors Tamara, Clegg, and Elizabeth Bonsignore are also in the audience as well, so we can field any questions afterwards. This talk and study was a collaboration between the Information School at the University of Washington, the University of Maryland's Human-Computer Interaction Lab, Carnegie Mellon's Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and was funded by the National Science Foundation. So today I'm going to talk about the modern family, and it's a different kind of family, and it's something that we as the HCI community are going to have to really think about. It's going to be forefronting a lot of new things that we have to consider. First, one of the things we have to consider about modern families is that as technology becomes more ingrained into the lives of families, parents are going to be a lot more anxious about children's adoptions of new software and technology such as cyberbullying, privacy, online safety. Second, in the United States, definitions of what constitutes home and household are now evolving rapidly, and families have to deal with issues such as divorce, separation, work separation. Modern families are also changing in terms of lower marriage rates, immigration, same-sex parenting, grandparents and parents, among a host of many, many issues. So we need to ask the question as the HCI community, how do we design tech for the modern family? Because we can't design for a single family structure in mind anymore. And more researchers to address this problem are now turning to co-design with families to better understand how to design suitable technologies for them. And so this study is grounded in the work of participatory design, particularly cooperative inquiry, as a framework from Drew in 2002. And we're considering the modern family as part of this framework. First, as a user, researchers often observe how families engage with these existing technologies. There might be and then as testers, families field test prototypes of new technologies and are asked directly about their experiences. Maybe when families are informants, they engage in the design process through sharing of ideas and knowledge about what their lives are like. And finally, as design partners, as we heard before today's talk, families can work directly and equally with design researchers throughout the process. And so while participatory design in families is not really a new field, a new knowledge within HCI, less is actually known about the process of how families can partner with design researchers throughout the development of new technologies. And so, for example, Isol and Fales spotlighted a lack of HCI studies focusing on families in their review of two major areas. First, 9 years of the ACM Interaction Design Children Conference, and 16 years of SIGCHI conference. And in their analysis of these two major years, 84 papers were found about families and technology. That's great, 84, that's a really big number. But actually a small 4 papers were found only as families as design partners. And it's 2006, so I don't think the needle has moved very far from that as well. So in our examination of the literature, a little bit more broadly than the HCI, the SIGCHI, and IEC, we found 2 kinds of paper topics as well. And the first one being that researchers in participatory design tended to focus on the method of design or the techniques, like what can we do to work with families, how did we do this. And the second, the number of studies that have been developed and researched on focus on the technological products. What did we build? How do we build it with contextual inquiries? How do we build it with co-design partnerships? What are the ways that we actually design these technologies? So while prior studies on technologies tend to focus on the co-design method and techniques and oftentimes the product developed, there's been a lack of studies of understanding the whole engagement process. What happened from start to finish? What is this process going on? And so we argue in this paper that without an in-depth understanding of the evolutionary processes of design partnerships between researchers, children, and adults, we risk overlooking these complex relationships that can ultimately affect this whole co-design process. And so in this study, to understand what was going on, we asked the main research question: how did the design processes between children, parents and guardians, and researchers evolve over time, and how might we best support them? So we addressed this issue by documenting an evolutionary process of co-design that emerged between families and researchers and children over a 10-month design-based research study. And this co-design is situated in a larger study called Science Everywhere. And here we're designing ubiquitous technologies that include mobile social media and tangible community displays aimed at enhancing connected science learning in neighborhoods with children, parents, teachers, and other local stakeholders. And so as part of the theoretical framework, it got cut off a little bit right there, our study focuses on the engagement and social activities between parents and children in the design partnerships. And so in everyday situation, parents and children are always engaging together with their social bonds, whether it's language development help, technology, competency, discourse practices, and other interactions. And for many of these interactions, parents can often act as the expert or the authority, but co-design partnerships, as we've seen in the prior talk, really disrupt these traditional engagements and social bonds, and we have to consider this. We also frame our analysis through the lens of social-cultural interactions. And Levin Wenger described this notion of legitimate peripheral participation, which are small tasks that help newcomers become more experienced members in a community. And we examined how people transition from the periphery towards the core experience over time through collaborations, engagements, and interactions with the researchers and co-design over time. So the methodology of the study is a case study methods bounded between 9 design sessions over a 10-month period from September 2014 to July 2015. We recruited 14 diverse families for this study to participate with us, and all families and children lived within the local neighborhood in a metropolitan area of the United States. After the 10-month study, we conducted interviews with 5 of the parents and 8 of the children to understand their co-design process of what happened, what was going on in those 10-month period, and to examine our data consisting of low-tech prototypes, analytic memos, video and audio recordings, interviews, and pictures. We used a grounded theory approach with constant comparative analysis. And so we coded and examined for when participants were motivated or not motivated in co-design, what were some of the community values the families were telling us, what were some of the tensions between the parents and children, the researchers, and overall outcomes of the design process. So with these findings, we selected 5 findings to really dig deep, 5 of the meetings to really dig deep towards in the paper. I'm going to talk about these findings by first describing a little bit about the case in each of these meetings. And after I describe each of the case, I'm going to go through an analysis of the engagements with the families and the actual social processes and the bonds that were occurring. So in meeting 2 of Science Everywhere, we observed that when parents did want to be supportive in co-design. We did have an activity, but they were initially uncomfortable with the notion of co-designing with children. So for example, Mr. Estevez, a pseudonym here in this picture, sat at a table in the co-design session and used his smartphone mostly to text or use it in that way, but he didn't really engage in the activity directly. And speaking limited English, he responded to us mostly by nodding his head. And other parents also took on sort of the practices of passive observers. They came to watch their children co-design, but they weren't necessarily participating actively. And so we found some, like Mr. Estevez and other parents, engaged both passively and supportively. They prefer not to directly contribute, but they remain present in the meeting to show support for their children. We found that some parents advocated for their children. They took the opposite spectrum. They're like, tell your idea, it's great. And so they were kind of pushing their children along. Others were acting as parental managers, like, don't do that, like, just be quiet, you know, to just mitigate embarrassment and such, or behavior. So what we found in the social bonding was that parental managements of child interaction did affect the initial co-designer dynamics, and that all of our children and parents were newcomers to the co-design process, and that what we noticed was that techniques and methods, while great in and of themselves, we need to have a shift in the perspective of the relationships between the parents and children before applying co-design techniques. So in meeting 4, at this point we decided to split the parents up in children. Our research team grew concerned that parents weren't comfortable yet acting as full participants in the initial co-design participation. So in subsequent sessions we separated the children to go through co-design activities, and parents to increase comfort levels in the parents and encourage more honest dialogue about sensitive issues. We found children, when we separated them, the children could act as design partners, as what Brenna talked about before. They created, they built, they helped us understand things. And with the parents, they acted as more as informants in this part of the study. They were telling us ideas. They were telling us about their vulnerabilities as parents, how it's hard, and that it's actually a really, and this kind of opened up some really great dialogue for us. We did find some parents that were still sort of the passive but supportive, not really ready yet to engage in this process, and that was okay. And so one of the things we want to start saying was that separation, we believe, really did allow parents to interact with each other more comfortably and to talk with each other more, and it just sort of opened up a lot more relationships for us. But they were still not really yet comfortable yet to do full co-design partnerships with us. By about meeting 6, Children and parents openly voiced very actually different opinions about their family life. We asked children to tell us about what homework was like and what learning technologies were like at home. And if you didn't know, your children disagree with you on all this. Many children said they often had to teach their parents about the homework before they could actually get help. So they acted as informants and critics, right? They were telling us things that were kind of like, uh-oh, like, should we show this to the parents? Like, they may not be happy with this data. So when we showed, Tammy's here, like, actually with a child, like showing some of the data off. When we showed some of this data to the parents, actually we were surprised. In contrast, the parents were actually very reflective about this data. They weren't defensive at all. For these sessions, we observed parents opening up about these conflicting viewpoints and actually feeling like, oh, like, you know, your child is also conflicted with you and my child is conflicted with me. This is great. Like, we can actually talk about this. And so what we noticed was that parents needed time together to see each other's struggles. Like, parenting's hard. It's not an easy process in this case. And so it sort of helped us to strengthen these social bonds and nurture these practices for co-design. By about meeting 8 months, months later, we were able to actually design with the families. So in this video right here, parents and children work together with the design researchers using a technique called layered elaboration, where you take a piece of transparency paper and write all over the user interface. Parents and children work together with design researchers. However, when we assigned the parents and children to random groups, most of the families decided just to stay within their own unit. They still just wanted to stay together. These two families, the particular left on the right there, parent and child. And so we noticed that through this sort of like social strengthening, parents were actually able to take on some of the practice of co-design partnership. To my left right here is Mr. McDonald. He is elaborating on a design he made for the parent version of the app, and he begins to have a dialogue with Mr. Alexter here on the right. And Mr. Alexter begins to also generate feedback with him as well about the posts and the ideas for elaboration. And so what we found was that as they were elaborating, we started noticing that there were these closer bonds with families over the researchers in times, and that the underlying foundational social bonds are now present, that we could apply design techniques such as layered elaboration, which has been noted in the literature to be very difficult for novices who've not done this before. Now we were actually able to have the bonds and engagements to apply that technique. And so finally, in week 9, we split the parents and children to random groups, parents working together with other families' children, inviting them to co-design the community's interactive public tangible screen. Families seem more comfortable now at this point in the grouping assignments. And adults, rather than actually having the adults stand up to present, actually adults felt like they wanted to facilitate the conversation. They actually encouraged different children to speak out more. And it was interesting to note that they receded from public participation, but they were actually still talking. They were actually asking children to invite in the conversation. And we noticed that actually what was starting to interesting change was that parents started acting as advocates for other children. So one of the stories that we like to share in the paper, when Tammy was starting to wrap up the design activity, Miss Alexter comes up to Tammy and says, to request, hey, you forgot Tommy. There's another kid you totally forgot to have him present. Don't you want him to present? And so Miss Alexter begins to advocate for wanting a child that's not her own child, someone else's kid, to actually have a positive experience in design partnerships. And so in these two examples, parents start to shift now towards this project collaborator role or engagement. They start seeing this as an important activity for the children and the researchers and the adults. And so we believe that overall, after about 10 months now, that the stronger social bonds were developing. But again, it took 10 months of engagement and evolution and negotiation just to get to this point. And so throughout the study, in our implications, we learned a great deal of the process of co-designing with children, parents, and researchers. And first, one of the things we learned about was that it can actually be a very slow transitional process of evolving engagements and establishing social bonds. And during this sort of early stage of the co-design process, parents relied on what they knew best. Like parents, that's your kid. You know what you engage in the ways you're normally engaged. But co-design asks to change all that. So we needed time to actually support parent-to-parent and child-to-child bonds first, and then transition towards this parent-child social bonding. And what we found was that the separation finally gives some parents some chance to actually have deeper conversations, particularly about family issues and struggles that they may deal with. Adults often, it's been known in the literature from Odili Guha and others, that adults actually experience a learning curve as they transition to full design partner. And our findings suggest that actually the learning curves could be even steeper and more difficult for parents, as they may have different motivations and perspectives and what it means to participate in co-design with their children. So one of the things we recommend is that parents might benefit actually from more facilitation from the researchers than children do. And so while we observe that children adapted very quickly to these co-design techniques and methods, the parents were a little bit more hesitant. And so we had to offer guidance to parents during co-design sessions, such as explicit reminders of the goals and the tasks, and that it's okay to give your idea out. That's totally fine. You should tell your idea. We had to allow parents to join the design group when they felt comfortable. We never pushed the parents to come. It was always very inviting. We would do co-design work and just ask the parents whenever they felt like they wanted to join, they could join in. So as we conclude, our contributions to HCI and co-design is that we focused on this engagement process right here, being able to do that. But the engagement process really speaks to some of the guidelines and strategies that you have to work with families. And some of the future work we want to begin to transition to is that while we decide that new methods and techniques for co-design are great for families, like coming up with the next best thing would be awesome, we're recommending that you really also need to build into that time social bonds and engagement, because the techniques themselves are just tools, they're methods. But without the relationships and the underlying foundations that are needed, those techniques may be limited in that sense. So we want to thank the children for this study, the parents and community members, and our reviewers and readers from DUB and HCIL for this work. Thank you very much.